Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. So, Brian, let's start off today's show with a little bit of a throwback to our days covering the pandemic and COVID stats, because the CDC is poised to make some changes to COVID guidelines.
Yeah, and this is like transport yourself all the way back to 2020 and 2021, especially when there were all these CDC protocols. And then what happened is it settled at a place and it hasn't changed since then, which was a recommendation by the CDC to isolate for 5 days after a COVID diagnosis, including the elimination of symptoms. Now, what the CDC is doing is backing those off and treating it like any other illness, which is to isolate for 24 hours after symptoms improve. So not after symptoms are gone completely, but after symptoms improve. The idea of being contagious is by 24 hours after symptoms started improving would be quite low. So if there's anybody out there who is still following COVID protocols, I don't know if there were any or not, or even knew that such a thing still existed. That has changed now. Just kind of treated like if you had a cold or flu or something like that. It would be real similar to just the normal behavior that people have. And you're sick, stay home. You start feeling better, you're good to go to head back out and start resuming normal activities.
All right. So let's move on to inflation news. The Consumer Price Index report is out. So what is the latest inflation rate?
So the overall consumer price index, this is the headline number, the main one that everybody looks at, 3.1%. And that's a little higher than expected. It was expected to come in at 2.9. So it would have been the first time it would have been coming in lower than 3% in quite some time. A couple of things to keep in mind. There's the inflation itself coming in lower than expected, which was kind of hard for for a lot of investors to take. That was a major disappointment because of kind of what it signals for the future. But also core inflation came in at 3.9%. So core inflation is when they take food and fuel out of the mix, and which are commodities that move independent of other factors and move quick up and down, fast moves up and down. That core inflation doesn't move so fast. That was at 3.9%. It was expected to be 3.7%. So this is now the 34th consecutive month with inflation over 3%, which is a long time. It was expected to break that streak. It was three. Remember, last month it was 3%. Now it's a little higher, 3.1%. So the idea that it went up was a pretty big disappointment, and that's a kind of surprise. So you may have noticed if you watch your stock portfolio that the day that this news came out, the update numbers, it was a pretty rough day on Wall Street, but really just a signal that this last part to get that core inflation down to about half of what it is right now is going to be really difficult, maybe more difficult than people thought just a few months ago, when it seemed like decline was slow but so steady. And unfortunately, it just seems to have got stuck at the point where it's at.
So given this news, what does that mean for interest rates?
It wasn't that long ago when the expectation was that interest rates would start being reduced. The Fed funds rate, the Federal Reserve controls that going to be primary interest rate, they would start reducing it at the March meeting. And then with some data that came out, the jobs report, especially in January, it started to change what people were thinking in terms of their expectations. So you saw like it's funny, there's like a betting market on this, like the expectations were 50-50 in March. Would there be a decrease or not in the interest rate? It was 50-50 odds. I would say now that the odds of a rate decrease in March are 0.0%. I basically think there's no chance that there will be a reduction in interest rates that soon. I still think there will be this year, but this was too disappointing of a report. And again, when I say too disappointing of a report, there's just something to be said for expectations were so strong and so solid. Everybody just assumed this is absolutely the direction it's going to go. And to see it kind of move in the other direction was a huge disappointment. So I think once that kind of wears off and people realize that, yeah, but it's not like extremely high either, like before. The question is, are there pressures that will move it back up from here? If the answer is no to that, then it's just going to take a little bit more patience. And so I think it's still likely that there'll be reductions in interest rates, but it will not happen in March.
All right. Well, thank you for the report on that. Obviously, time will tell. We've talked about Michigan being a battleground state for the upcoming presidential election, and two high-profile visits kind of cement that. Who's coming to visit?
Yeah, we've got on both sides of the aisle leading up to Michigan's presidential primary, which is on February 27th. So coming right up, we've got a presidential primary, and Michigan is, remember, it's a big state, it's the 10th biggest state in America. So it's a big deal, and it's expected to be competitive. And the evidence is are the major candidates coming? And so we saw yesterday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was here, and while you might say, well, that's not like a campaign person. No, but when you start seeing these cabinet secretaries doing more public appearances around the country, it's a sign that market is a priority. So Treasury Secretary appeared with Governor Whitmer yesterday at the Detroit Economic Club. Then President Trump will be joining or will be coming to Southeast Michigan and in Oakland County, and then the Vice President Harris will be visiting in Grand Rapids. All of that prior to Michigan's presidential primary on the 27th. Now, I wouldn't suggest that the outcome of Michigan's presidential primary is in any way, shape, or form in question. President Biden will win the Democratic primary. President Trump will win the Republican primary here. There's not any real question on that in terms of where their positioning is. But they're already, both camps are looking forward to the general election. Michigan is really a must-win state for the candidates. This is proven to be a battleground, and so we see some high-profile visits, and I expect that will be a very regular occurrence between now and November of this year.
Speaking of politics, what's the latest news from Michigan's Republican Party?
Yeah, so it's like a fiasco. You've heard about this where the party imploded. They don't have ability. It's like not even a viable entity or organization running. And there was a challenge. So you have the party chair, the person who's like in charge of the political party itself, was ousted in a contested vote by so Christine Caramo is the name of that person, and then former Congressman Pete Hoekstra also was the ambassador to the Netherlands under the Trump administration, has run and beat her in a convention, and it just as recognition that the party wasn't even a viable ongoing entity. And but that was contested. It was like, well, there was a different group of delegates, and so there's this thing, and if you're not in the middle of the political mix, people don't even know what this means. But it actually has ramifications this month in the presidential primary, because while the National Democratic Party approved moving Michigan's primary into February, on February 27th. The National Republican Committee did not approve that. And they're the ones who decide whether or not Michigan's delegates get recognized in August when they pick the presidential nominees. And so what happens in Michigan, the way that the Republican Party tried to accommodate this, say, okay, we'll do this election. And some delegates will be assigned by that, but the rest will be done in a committee, or not a committee, a convention, a political convention in March, when the National Party will say that Michigan can hold its contests. Well, tonight, all the county parties will be holding their conventions and choosing delegates to go to the state convention in March. So there'll be a primary in Michigan, but the majority of the delegates will be signed by a convention that happens after the primary on the Republican side of the ticket. And it is contested who the chair of the party is right now. And the chair is the one who convenes the convention. So it's a bit of chaos that's happening right now. And it's not clear how the county delegates will go and have their say in the state convention right now, because the person who would be calling and organizing the convention at the state level is contested. Now, the National Republican Party has stepped in and recognized, or indicated, endorsed essentially, Pete Hoekstra as the new chair of the party. But there's still legal action. That's not the end all be all. It doesn't just decide it. There's still lawsuits at the state level. So it is a real mess and kind of a strange circumstance that exists. But I do expect with the National Party stepping in that it kind of put legs underneath Hoekstra's challenge, and probably the court decision will therefore go his way. Whether it'll happen in time for this presidential convention to be set out, I don't know. So I don't think that really makes a difference in terms of the outcome of the nomination at the end of the day, but certainly not what any of the folks had in mind when they moved up Michigan's primary to be one of the earliest states to have one of the two parties in such disarray right now. So there's, I think, some renewed thought that maybe with new leadership it'll get back on track and have two viable parties in Michigan again. But for now, it's still kind of a wait and see approach.
All right. Let's talk about this economic development package and some business incentives that are on the table. We do have a guest lined up for Monday's show, so we're not going to go into a lot of detail here, but Brian, can you just give us a quick overview of what's going on?
Hardly anything is moving through the political process right now, because in the House of Representatives, there's a 54-54 tie, and the dynamics to have a lot of cooperation just don't exist. So until there's special elections to fill a couple vacant seats, there's 54-54 tie. So not a lot is moving through. One of the things, though, that at least is at a stage where it's getting hearings and a little traction, is the next generation of business incentives. The previous deal, which was called SOAR, the Strategic Outreach and Reserve Fund, Strategic Outreach and Reserve SOAR Fund, that kind of fell out of favor. It was used for all these big deals, and some of those deals ended up being very controversial. The cost per job was really high, and the just fatigue set in. And so that has kind of been, I'll say, generally shelved. Some still hope to revive it. I don't see the dynamics where that could happen. But in its place, really going back to a couple of ideas that used to be on the table. One of which is there's an acronym, HIRE is what it's called, but it's this idea that there would be the ability of employers who create new jobs to capture some or all of the income tax, the state income tax they collect, and instead of remitting it to state government for a period of time, the business would be able to keep it as an incentive to create that job. So that type of mechanism has been in place in the past. and they're talking about bringing it back. So it would be essentially, it would work like a 4% subsidy to new job growth. Our main goal, if they're to go that direction, is to try to reduce the number of jobs that have to be created to qualify for it. It's not for everybody. Before, it used to be hundreds of jobs had to be created before you could kind of negotiate for one of these credits. What's being considered or contemplated now is moving it down to 25 jobs, the threshold of 25 jobs, which obviously still doesn't work for all small businesses, but it makes it at least kind of in the realm where it could be relevant to some small businesses. Would love to even see it get reduced further, of course, to 10 or so. And then the other one that I think will be pretty relevant to a segment of small businesses is the research and development tax credit. And some people think, when people think about research and development, they automatically think about huge corporations or universities and that sort of thing. But there are a lot of activities that small businesses engage in that qualify as research and development. And we've been on a mission to make sure as they revive a research and development tax credit, that it be structured in a way that is attainable for small businesses and that is industry agnostic, that doesn't try to pick which industries are worthy of R&D credit support and which aren't. If they're going to do it, it should be for all industries. And so those are some of our objectives as it moves through the process. We're working with some other business organizations as well. And it's one of the few things that has getting a little bit of action in the legislative process that is otherwise pretty paralyzed at the moment.
Right. And like I said, we do have a guest coming on Monday's show, so we'll dive into that a little bit deeper then. Brian, Cranes ran an article today about the impact the NFL draft could have on Detroit. That's coming up in April, and on small businesses in particular.
Yeah, there's a big impact, like these big sporting events, like just had a Super Bowl in Las Vegas, and so big impact of those sorts of things. And these really are net big positives for communities usually, as opposed to say like the Olympics, which usually costs more to put on than it brings to a community. Something like an NFL draft brings in, the overall production of it isn't that expensive, but it brings so many people to town, big spenders too. So in restaurants and catering, could be janitorial services, event production, the number of like receptions and car rentals, and I mean, there's just so many different things that happen around one of these. Um, the estimated extra spend, economic impact, because people are spending extra or coming here and spending, is around $100 million. $100 million. That might be a surprise to some, although NFL is huge business, and so where they go, a lot of economic activity happens. The There is a group of organizations that are trying to make sure that more of that $100 million impact lands with small businesses, and so one organization that's a strategic partner of ours, we'll see if we can get them on the briefing, but the Metro Detroit Black Business Alliance is the name of the organization, and they're one of the main players in this effort to make sure that more of this NFL impact lands with small business. So there's a really cool coordinated effort that's happening, and we're just thrilled to see this coming together. So we'll share more with you about it once we see if we can get some of the folks that are living right in the middle of it to share with you. But what a huge event. What a great opportunity. Detroit has gone after the NFL draft unsuccessfully before, but hit it here for 2024. So see where it goes. And who knows? Maybe this will be the next step on the way to the Lions getting to the next level. But I'm not an expert. I've already disclosed before. You will find you won't find very many people that are let's just say I'm passionate about Michigan State basketball. Totally passionate about Michigan State basketball. Keep a little bit of gas in the tank for the NFL and the Lions, and it's good for them. But the economic impact, that's something I can get excited about.
All right. Well, thanks for that. That is, it's definitely exciting and can't wait to see what happens for Detroit. We have a couple of events coming up next week. On February 20th, we have a webinar with Aisha Qureshi on brand identity. She is a repeat webinar host. We had a fantastic one from her back in the fall as well. So if you're interested in learning more about brand identity and standing out and attracting customers, join us on the 20th at 2 p.m. And then, as we mentioned before, we do have two fantastic owner-to-owner events coming up in February. Next week, the 21st, will be a Crawl Space Comedy Theater in Kalamazoo. And then the following week, on the 28th, we will be at the President's Residence at University of Michigan. So again, sbam.org events has the details on all of those and more. We'd love to see you at one of these events, get a chance to connect in person. So be sure to check them out and register. That is everything we have for you today. So we hope you have a great weekend and we'll see you back here on Monday at 3.
Thanks so much. See you next week.